Penguin Random House Audio presents Ritz and Escoffier, The Hotelier, the Chef, and the Rise of the Leisure Class by Luke Barr. Read for you by Stefan Rudnicki. Part 1. The Grand Opening, 1889. 1. The Hotelier and the Impresario. In early August 1889, César Ritz left Cannes on an overnight train, the 8:43 p.m., bound for Calais. He was en route to London, ensconced in a private cabin, traveling alone. He wore a suit with a high-collared shirt, a tie and waistcoat, and a bowler hat. As usual, he was dressed impeccably. A white carnation in his lapel, his mustache carefully waxed. Ritz was a young man, but his hairline had begun to recede above his high brow and intelligent, watchful eyes. He looked around the compact cabin. It was wood-paneled, with brass coat hooks, a mirror, and a number of storage compartments for his personal items. His trunk had been taken by a porter when he boarded the train. Now Ritz hung his jacket in the small closet and placed his hat on the rack. The weather was hot, and he was glad to be traveling at night. Ritz loved to travel, the thrill and speed of it, the trains rushing toward the future. The Calais Mediterranean Express train he was on now, for example, had launched a few years earlier, in 1886, and was state-of-the-art, with a restaurant car and onboard lavatories, precluding the need for rest stops at stations along the way. The train ran slowly along the French Riviera, stopping at resort towns like Menton and Monte Carlo, before speeding north through Lyon and Paris, and on to the English Channel. From there, Ritz would board a ferry, and then another train to London. The trip would take a full night and day. It was remarkably fast, Ritz thought. The express trains were transforming European travel, and especially the towns along the Mediterranean. The English had been coming to the Côte d'Azur for a century already, traveling by carriage and on boats. Rail lines had made the trip far easier. There were numerous competing train companies using the tracks. The long-established Marseille to Nice service along the coast dated back to the 1860s, which was when the Cannes station had been built, a small white building with a roof covering both tracks. But the express trains heralded a new era, bringing throngs of visitors from all over Europe. This was good for Ritz. He was in the hotel business. Why was he going to London anyway? He hated London. Well, he'd never been to London, actually, but he hated the idea of it, the gloom, the fog, the dour English propriety and cool reserve, the mediocre food. He was continental, in every sense of the word. His business was pleasure. Ritz was a hotel man, welcoming guests with well-practiced charm at his two small properties, one in Cannes, the Hotel de Provence, the other in Baden-Baden, Germany, the Hotel Minerva, where he also ran the Restaurant de la Conversation. He was 39 years old and had been working in the business his whole life, in Lucerne, Paris, and Vienna, in San Remo, Monte Carlo, and Trouville, all over Europe, following the glamorous trail of vacationing aristocrats and wealthy tourists as they took their cures and baths and sought mountain air in the summer and Mediterranean sun in winter. They were an international tribe, increasingly mobile. The Orient Express, with its luxurious sleeping cars, had just launched the first non-stop train between Paris and Constantinople, and Ritz had cultivated a following among them. The dapper young Swiss hotelier was effortlessly multilingual, if heavily accented, and never forgot a name or a face. Not only that, he also took careful note of his clients' whims and desires, who preferred what for breakfast, who required a carafe of water on his bedside table at night. Ritz was also a showman, an orchestrator of evening entertainments and gala dinners. Indeed, it was because of one such grand dinner that he now found himself, however reluctantly, on the train to London. It had been almost a year ago, that dinner, at Ritz's recently opened restaurant in Baden-Baden. The Restaurant de la Conversation was already the talk of the town. He had advertised both the hotel and restaurant extensively, printing lavish brochures, and installed electric lights above the terrace, twinkling in the branches of the plants and trees. He was soon attracting a glamorous crowd. Kaiser Wilhelm I, the German emperor, had eaten dinner there, and Ritz had made sure everyone knew it. Baden-Baden was a summer resort, a place people came to for the casinos and the racetrack, and of course for the hot spring baths. Baden is German for bath. And it was a town where in the evening elaborate dinner parties were held. So when Prince Radziwill, a leading member of the Kaiser's circle and Berlin society, told Ritz that he wanted to host a dinner that would be remembered, something original, he said, and that cost was not a concern, Ritz seized the opportunity. This was the sort of challenge Ritz loved, to create a spectacle. And all the better to do so with an unlimited budget. This would be more than a dinner. It would be an event. He landed upon a simple, summary idea, to bring the outside in. He covered the entire floor of the restaurant with grass, and the walls with roses, hundreds and hundreds of them. He placed potted trees among the tables, and brought a stone fountain and pool into the restaurant, and filled it with exotic goldfish. At the center of this theatrical indoor woodland scene was an enormous fern. Ritz had seen it at one of the local horticultural gardens, and managed to rent it for the night. That alone had cost a small fortune. Then he built a table around the towering plant, and covered that with yet more flowers. Ritz was a great believer in flowers, vast, extravagant quantities of them. He sometimes thought he was single-handedly keeping the local florists in business. He hired an orchestra, designed the menu, and then basked in the delight of the prince and his guests. The scene was magical, transporting the diners into a kind of Midsummer Night's Dream stage-set fantasy, and the evening, despite all the logistical hurdles, was a stunning success. It was just after dinner when Ritz was approached by an Englishman named Richard D'Oyly Carte. "This is the sort of thing," D'Oyly Carte said, his arm sweeping across the room, "I'd like to do at my new hotel in London." D'Oyly Carte was a few years older than Ritz, in his mid-40s, a short, wiry, frenetic man, with a full beard and piercing brown eyes that seemed to have an orange tint. He owned the Savoy Theatre on the Strand in London. This was Theatreland, they called it, a raucous stretch of the Thames embankment that was the center of bohemian London's nightlife. D'Oyly Carte was now building a large luxury hotel next door to his theatre, also called the Savoy, one that he said would be the best in the world. D'Oyly Carte had made his fortune producing Gilbert and Sullivan's comic operas, hugely popular entertainments that included The Pirates of Penzance and The Mikado in the 1870s and 80s. The hotel was a long-held dream of his, a place for theatergoers to eat dinner and, if they were from out of town, stay the night. D'Oyly Carte had traveled widely and was convinced that London was ready for a truly modern hotel. The two men had met before, 2 years earlier in Monte Carlo. D'Oyly Carte had stayed at the Grand, which Ritz was then managing, and had been effusive in his praise. "There is not a hotel in London," he proclaimed, "where you can get a decent meal, much less one where you can dine like a god, as one does here." He went on to tell Ritz when they spoke in Monte Carlo that London desperately needed a good hotel with a good restaurant, or better yet, a great hotel with a great restaurant. Yes, what London needed was a man like Ritz. "You'd make money hand over fist," D'Oyly Carte said. "Hand over fist." There were plenty of large hotels in London. The Langham, the...
Sample complete. Ready to continue?